So folks, it's time to wrap up our Titans card reviews. This is the final review. Every single card has been revealed, and man, what a crazy one to end on here with some warrior cards and Odin Prime Designate. This is an 8-mana 8/8 for warrior. Battle cry: for the rest of the game, after your hero gains armor, they gain that much attack for that turn. So yeah, turning your armor into damage, which is pretty crazy. I first want to just think about this card in wild format with some of the crazy armor gain that you could do in wild format, you know, like Armor Smith shenanigans. Armor Smith actually was pulled from the core set, which I thought at the time was weird. Now I understand why in standard that might be too crazy. So I can imagine some like really wacky OTK stuff in wild. Now for standard, for the purposes of this review, there's still some pretty good armor gain in standard. There's a few cards specifically here I think are worth pointing out. Stuff like Shield Block, which recently got buffed to 2, if you remember. That's insane. Like, gain 5 armor, deal 5 damage, draw a card. Like, that's actually nuts. Razorfin Rockstar basically makes all of this stuff even crazier. Suddenly, each of these cards giving you an extra 2 attack, setting up some potential lethal blows. Stuff like Heavy Plate is now an 8-mana card. Is it like Inner Demon or something for Demon Hunter, where it's like 8 mana, gain 8 attack? Well, with Heavy Plate, you can just do that for 3 while still getting the armor that you want. And obviously, it doesn't end there. There's a handful of other armor gain cards available in warrior, and yeah, I can kind of see this coming together. Like, look, an 8-mana 8/8 is a really expensive card to play. That's a big pass turn. We've talked about with other things how that can be really tough to do, stuff like Hodier, I think we talked about in Hunter. But the difference is, if you're playing a deck that's already running a lot of armor gain cards, you're playing a deck that's a little bit more defensively minded, something like a control warrior, this basically says, I'm going to have time eventually to play an 8-mana 8/8 because I have extra life. I have all these stabilization tools. So I'll find a moment to weave this in. And then once I do, suddenly all of those same stabilization tools that have gotten me to this point now give me the ability to turn the corner and end the game so that I can actually just win this and, you know, push my opponent over with all of this damage turn after turn, while also still making sure that I'm staying alive, netting you this just enormous health advantage every single turn. And you hope that's enough to, you know, just beat down priests and other sort of control decks that might have more of a value game plan that might eventually you know, wear you down. But if you can just kill them first, whether that's saving up for a big crazy burst and like 2 heavy plates in a single turn for 16 plus a couple shield blocks for another 10 with a Razorfin Rockstar on board, it's like boom, you can put together 30 damage really quickly. Or, you know, just kind of weaving this stuff in turn after turn, and if they don't have enough life gain, just getting there after a while. So I actually think this is a pretty cool recipe for success and a really cool win condition for warrior decks. I love gaining armor, and having extra ways to utilize that's pretty fun. Also, this card just looks sick. I think Odin's a really cool character. I remember fighting him in the Legion dungeon. He was super cool, and he looks awesome here. Really looks like a warrior card. So all in all, this looks strong to me and looks awesome to me. Very, very excited to give this a try. So moving on, we've got an armor gain card here for warrior in the new set, which they actually didn't get very many armor gain cards to support Odin. A lot of other little different complementary stuff. Gonna have to rely on older armor gain cards mostly, but the Minotauran here is a 6-mana 5/5 with Rush. Whenever this minion deals damage, gain that much armor. So at a base here, you're hoping to use this to take a nice little trade on board, maybe even a value trade if you can. You're going to heal 5 immediately if that's played post Odin. Obviously, you're going to get 5 attack as well, which could be nice to clean something else up or just push face. That's good. And then if this lives and your opponent has to trade into it themselves, remember, even on defense, this is dealing damage. This is not when it attacks. So this could ultimately get you like another 5 armor even on defense as well, or if the opponent can't clear it and you're able to attack face again, right? So I think often, in fact, this might actually just be a heal 10 sort of card that's also able to trade in. Also keep in mind, warrior has ways to manipulate stats. We've got hand buffs, we got like black rock and roll stuff, so this could be even bigger from an armor gain standpoint as well, which is pretty spicy to think about. You know, take a trade on board and heal 10 and deal 10 is kind of a crazy card if all that lines up. Now, obviously, you're not always going to want to save a card like this for after Odin, but I actually think still decent. You know, it's not amazing at 6 mana. It's still going to leave some stuff on board from time to time, but if it can hit a 3/3, maybe absorb another hit here and there, that's a solid play. I just don't think it's crazy. So I guess we'll have to see how the like control armor Odin warrior builds kind of shake out. They may need like cheaper, more flexible armor gain. Something like this might end up feeling kind of clunky in the scheme of things, but I don't think it's awful. So I could see this being near the bottom of the list, basically card 27, 28, 29, 30 range, and making the cut at least for a little while until they get some more tools. So next up, this card looks kind of crazy. The Stone Skin Armorer. This is a 3-mana 3/4 and battle cry. If your armor changed this turn, draw 2 cards. Now, that wording is important. Change does not just mean goes up. So if your armor goes down in a given turn, this also draws 2 cards. So if you're able to gain armor early and then do things like attack, for instance, if you have a weapon up, and take some damage while attacking, great way to activate the Stone Skin Armorer. Obviously, just a hero power or a cheap armor gain card is another great way to do this. So I think actually pretty consistently going to be hitting this one. There's a lot of different ways to set this up. Even if you have to spend 5 to gain some armor and use the Stone Skin Armor, I think some slower warrior decks would be quite happy to do that, in fact, just because you get a nice little body and some good card draw, which certainly never hurts. So this card just looks really efficient, not that hard to activate, plays into the synergies we're seeing in this set. So all in all, this looks really good. Moving on here to the Craftsman's Hammer. This is a 4-mana 3/3. After your hero attacks and kills a minion, gain 4 armor. So this design's a little quizzical to me because they just showed us Odin, this big awesome new armor synergy legendary, and then Craftsman Hammer doesn't really work with Odin because you're going to gain the armor after you've already attacked. So that extra attack you might gain from Odin isn't really going to do anything, which is fine. Like, this card can still be good even without Odin support. It just feels a little bit, just awkward. It just feels odd that these would come out together, I guess, or sad. Maybe sad's the word, actually. So, you know, this reminds me a lot of the Baron's weapon, whose name escapes me. I'm gonna try to pull up real quick. The 4-mana warrior weapon in Barons that draws you a card when attacking, but I do think this is actually notably worse than that. That's the Outrider's Axe. Same cost and stat allocation, but I think ultimately you're gonna value the card draw much more, or at least more types of decks will value the card draw more, whereas Craftsman's Hammer here really does feel limited to a specific control deck in particular, because the only upside you're getting on this is basically life gain. This kind of lets you manage a mid-game board while not sacrificing too much health. Maybe preserving armor for future plays like shield slams and stuff can be valuable. So all in all, you know, it's solid again. It's a nice weapon. It's got a lot of attacks. It can do things you need. It just doesn't have that crazy upside, and certainly doesn't synergize with Odin, which feels, at least to me, like a lost opportunity. So next up here is Smelt, and this card might be a reason that you're a little more excited about something like Craftsman's Hammer, but not so sure that's true. But this is a 2-mana fire spell. It gives a random minion in your hand +3/+3, and you can lose 3 armor to do that again, and that is capped at 2 instances. So basically, if you have the armor when you play the Smelt, you're going to gain +6/+6 in hand. Might be split across 2 things, but you get the idea. That's intriguing. I think my problem or hesitation with this card, at least, is that that's a lot of stats, which feels very good for 2 mana, certainly, but I think lining this up at a meaningful moment is going to be a little bit awkward. In other words, you have to have gained the armor first, I think, to feel most excited about this. 2 mana for 3/3 hand buff it's just okay, really. I don't think that's enough. I think you really want the full hit here, which means, you know, you're not like playing this on turn 2, for instance, because you haven't had enough time to get 3 armor on turn 2. So like, when are you playing this? Turn 4, turn 5 range, when you've had a little bit of time to accrue that armor. By the time you get to turn 4 or 5, it takes you another turn to play the things that have been hand buffed, or maybe multiple turns. Those stats are coming in so late in the game. Stats like that tend to make a lower impact as a game wears on, because your opponent has access to bigger stuff, more removal, etc. So I just feel like this is going to have a real gap where it doesn't really get into play fast enough for it to feel worth it. And I think Warrior has other great ways to do hand buffs already that probably feel a little bit more reliable, seem to make more sense. This one, I think, is a little too conditional. Once you fall behind in a game, it might be hard to gain armor without playing another armor gain card with it. It's like also just decks that are running a lot of armor gain cards. Are they going to care about the stats? There's a little bit of something there. Like, I want the stats because I'm an aggressive deck. I don't want all these armor gain cards in an aggressive deck. Odin notwithstanding, but then if you got Odin damage, you also don't need these stats. So I think this card, although, you know, numerically speaking, makes a lot of sense from a context standpoint, like who is playing this and when they're playing this, I see a lot of issues with this one. So I actually think this will fall through the cracks and won't get played much. Moving on, the Steam Guardian here. This card I think has some crazy potential. A 3-mana 3/3 elemental. Battlecry, draw a spell and reduce the cost of a fire spell in your hand by 1. So couple cool things happening here. Number one, card draw, right? At a base, 3-mana 3/3 draw card. Maybe not the best thing in the world, but solid at a base. Number two, tutor. It draws a spell specifically, which means you can target the spell that you're hitting. And that's where I think this gets really interesting. For instance, look at this spicy boy, Black Rock and Roll, 5-mana spell. It's a fire spell, which means if you play this on turn 3, you can hit Black Rock and Roll, discount it to 4, play it on curve on turn 4, and you're off to the races on Black Rock and Roll. You could even technically make this the only spell in your deck to get full maximum minion value and guarantee that the Steam Guardians will hit you the Black Rock and Roll on time. That may or may not be the right thing to do, but it's certainly a possibility. But I also like this as an elemental in a Menagerie deck. Menagerie doesn't run a ton of spells. They run like Roaring Applause, basically, for their card draw. But even if you don't get the discount on a Roaring Applause, just tutoring a Roaring Applause while also having an elemental in your Menagerie deck probably feels worth it, I think. That seems good to me. A card draw that turns into a lot more card draw potentially can be very, very cool. So this card actually looks really flexible to me, has some really interesting high roll potential. The elemental tag is actually relevant in Menagerie Warrior. I see this being pretty good in a couple different ways. Moving on here to Bellowing Flames. This is a 3-mana spell. Fire, of course, like most of the cards in Warrior this set. Deal 5 damage to a minion and forge, then deal 5 damage split among all enemy minions. So total here of 10 damage for sort of 5 mana. You can front load that 2 and still play this on turn 3 as needed, or front load that 2 and save this for later and play it with other stuff more efficiently. Which, you know, cards like this look okay to me for a Control Warrior. This is an interesting shape. It does enough that I think it handles a lot of mid-game boards. Couple 3/3s, not a problem for this sort of thing. Couple 5/5s, actually not a problem for this. And the fact that you can do one big chunk and then have some cleanup, I think is also relevant. You know, even if there's like a 6/6 on board, you're probably happy to take your chances on this, even if there are a few 3/3s alongside it or something, right? You just hope that that final 1 damage hits the remainder of the 6/6 and doesn't run into other stuff instead. So, you know, basically, the fact that this has 2 different shapes of removal makes it more interesting for so many different board states. I think we looked at that Warlock card yesterday that felt like it was more limited, harder to line up because it was like 5 and it had healing attached. This being 5 and 5 seems more interesting to me. Warrior also as a Control Warrior is probably not too sad to forge stuff like this. Like, you may give up a hero power on turn 2 sometimes, which I think ultimately would save you more than 2 health if you're able to clean up a board more effectively. So yeah, I think this looks like a totally acceptable piece of removal for Control Warrior. Moving on, the Furious Furnace. This card looks crazy in the art. This is a 2-mana 1/3 mech. It's got magnetic and also damages minions next to whomever this attacks. So this is a way to give cleave to your mechs or potentially your amalgams in Warrior, which particularly for, I think, a Menagerie deck, if you could give your one amalgam band cleave and it's got like lifesteal on it, you're talking about insane healing potential, basically. I guess the question is, will that be worth it? Because this card needs to be both good in those like big scenarios with the cleave making a big impact, but also needs to be good, I think, elsewhere on top of that. And you know, there's obviously some mechs in Menagerie Warrior, and there's obviously a handful of amalgams in Menagerie Warrior. Is, for instance, like Mistake on 1 into Furious Furnace on 2 good enough? Like, does that help you keep up with your opponent's board so well and start scaling stats so early that something like that feels really good? I think it might. You know, this is another one of those that could be a bit meta dependent on the types of reaction you need. Like, are you trying to clean up a bunch of tutus early in the game? Are you trying to gain a bunch of life in one Amalgam Band decks, or are you just trying to push for pressure and aggression? Is the single hit on the Amalgam good enough, or the Wind Fury hit on the Amalgam good enough that a card like this would perhaps be a little too redundant? My honest guess is that this will feel too dead in hand too often, because it is, of course, limited to mechs or amalgams, which there are some, but you don't want cards to feel dead in hand. You want to feel like you can play them, and I don't think you're excited to play this at all without Magnetic, so the floor being a little bit too low on this one, despite the high ceiling, I think we'll exclude this from a lot of Menagerie decks, which is sad because this card looks really cool. So then finally here we have Trial by Fire. This card looks so freaking sick, and the tokens look so freaking sick. I love this like ODYN aesthetic, dude. This is so cool. It's a 7-mana fire spell. Summon 5 1/1 Valkyr with Rush, and then when one dies, give the others +1/+1. And you can see here that is actually a death rattle on the card, which is significant. It's not just like some aura tied to the spell. So if you had death rattle copies or shenanigans or whatever, you might be able to do some extra stuff here with the champions. That seems pretty unlikely though. At a base level though, this card's it's intriguing, right? So you get a 1/1, and then that means you get a 2/2 or 4 2/2s. Then you get 3 3/3s, and you get 2 4/4s, and you get 1 5/5 as these start to trade in, which I think is a total of 15 damage if you trade everything in, which does put it in a similar world to like Scale of Onyxia, for instance. But also can leave behind perhaps more threatening board shapes. You know, like 3 3/3s is a pretty interesting amount to leave behind, or 2 4/4s, for instance, is actually a pretty cool board, while still being able to trade in a 1/1, a 2/2, and a 3/3. That's actually pretty cool, right? There's different board shapes that might work nicely for that. So could this be a kind of removal card of sorts for a warrior deck? I don't really think more aggressive decks, more tempo-driven decks will be playing this one as often. I don't feel like it fits in there. I think you do want to use this as a reactionary card that's more about board clear and response than it is about development, but it just has this kind of development backup plan. When you get an extra minion or two left behind, I think you're just happy that you've left some stuff behind. So I don't know, that's intriguing. It is a little expensive at 7. We did see some fire discount earlier. This definitely feels better at 6 to me, but I don't know. Like, for instance, Scale of Onyxia and Druid, right? It was really good for 2 reasons. Number one, it pumped up and fused stuff really nicely. This is not going to be as relevant there because Denathrius isn't as relevant anymore. There's only 5 minions. But also, Druid just has access to a lot more mana faster, so that card came down a little sooner than a card like this might. And those are some big hesitations for this. 7 mana is way more expensive in Warrior than in Druid, and doesn't have that like additional secondary upside. And Warrior has access to other board clears. Druid is a class that really didn't. So as you start to look at this against its comparables, definitely feels a little underwhelming, I guess. But I still do think the shape of these minions left behind is intriguing enough that you might see this in a control warrior deck very occasionally. ODYN Prime Designate is a 4-star card. Minotaurin is a 3-star card. Stone Skin Armorer is a 4-star card. Craftsman's Hammer is a 3-star card. Smelt is a 2-star card. Steam Guardian is a 4-star card. Bellowing Flames is a 3-star card. Furious Furnace is a 2-star card. Trial by Fire is a 3-star card. And there you go, folks. We are done with the Titans card review. I am like really hyped for this set. I just love the theme of this one. I've always wanted Titan stuff. I love the Titan Keepers. These characters look so freaking cool to me. Design wise, some stuff I'm very excited to try, but I'm curious which, classes and decks you guys are most excited about. We got to do a theory crafting stream soon, so I'll want to try stuff that interests all of you. Which cards do you think are going to be the strongest? Share all those thoughts and more in the comments below. Thanks as always for joining me on yet another card review journey. I think this might be our longest or maybe second longest one ever, so appreciate you hanging out all this time. That said, thank you for watching, and until next time, game on.